So what is it that draws people over and over again to porn? What are those well-worn pathways to porn? Today, I talk about that with my buddy, John Fort from Be Broken Ministries.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Good to have you, John. You're involved with a great organization called Be Broken Ministries. I think your buddy or your boss, or maybe both, Jonathan Darty, is going to come on. We're going to do a podcast in a couple months from now. But I'm so glad to have you. What role do you play with Be Broken, and what kind of is your shtick with them?
Okay, I have two roles. My main role is director of training. So all of our training, particularly online training, we have a website called purelifeacademy.org, and we have a lot of online training related to healing from sexual brokenness.
Yep.
And then I'm also the parenting specialist.
Okay.
So any of those kind of issues I deal with.
Fair enough. So the whole area of sexual brokenness, of course, is something that you've got more than just a cursory understanding of. And we're going to get into these 6 or 7 pathways to porn and why people keep coming back to them or how they got introduced to porn. But why don't we, you want to just share a little bit of maybe what got you engaged in this whole topic and how you come into this whole sphere?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I've been in recovery for sexual addiction myself for 25 years, actually 26 this month. So 26 years. So it's done a lot for me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I began to work starting in 2008. I began to work full time in this area. I used to work for an organization called Pure Life Alliance in the Portland, Oregon area.
Okay.
And they run a large network of support groups for men and women affected by sexual addiction. And my role became eventually in that is the one who trained all of those leaders. Then I moved over to Be Broken about 5 years ago or so as the director of training for that organization, not doing support groups, but just the whole bigger picture. We even train other leaders and that kind of thing too.
Okay.
So, but you know, I'm doing this because I am the most sexually broken person I know. I come from my whole story is about as messy as they possibly can get. And if a person like me can find recovery, anybody can. So I want to share that with other people.
Yeah, that's cool, because nothing like walking out something that we've all been talking to people and they don't have no background in something. It just rings hollow when you talk to somebody who hasn't walked through a particular journey. And so when we were talking last time, we were having a conversation and just getting to know each other, and you kind of introduced, you said, Vern, there's really 6 or 7 kind of ways that get people into porn, but more importantly, keep them coming back to porn. And I was listening to you talk about them. I thought, okay, stop. I wish I'd hit record before that. So I said, okay, you got to come on back. And so we can walk through those, because I think they're so helpful for us as we try to wrestle with, why do I continue to struggle with what I'm struggling with? And you've got some really interesting ideas behind that from the research. So I'd love to get,
Well, I want to give credit where credit's due.
Mm-hmm.
It actually started with an organization called Defend Young Minds. They used to be called Protect Young Minds. They changed their name this year. And they mainly deal with helping parents help their kids resist pornography. But they did some original research a couple of years ago. It's not published yet. I was privileged to get inside information on the results of that. But they did original research on men and women who were pornography addicts and looking back to why they're doing this, and how it started and why they keep going back. And it's mixed in with something called jobs to be done theory by Clayton Christensen, who was of the Harvard Business School. He's passed away now, but the idea is like people, the way this was actually originally designed for product marketing idea is like people buy a product to get a job done. and to think about this. And so what they're saying is, let's apply that to pornography. Pornography is a product. We hire it to get a job done. So if we look at what job we're hiring pornography to do for us, that gives us insight on our motivation of why we're doing it in the first place. So they came up with 4 reasons in their research, but I threw in 3 more that I've learned in my time at Be Broken and Pure Life Alliance that I wanted to add to. So we have 7 ways. All of these can be ways people start looking at pornography, but they can all also be ways that we keep coming back, except for the first one is mainly why we start, but we'll get to that. So
let me just stop you for a second. Sure. I'm so fascinated with that jobs to be done. My undergraduate degree is in marketing and from business school. And so it's really fascinating that we're almost talking about the marketing of porn and what it does for us. So I'm tracking with you. You're right up my alley here. So continue on.
Excellent. And just so you know, I'm a little bit of a geeky, analytical kind of person. So I approach things that way. That's why this really interests me. So the first reason is curiosity. And of course, as kids, that's oftentimes how we get started. But we can't forget that as adults, sometimes that's why we go back. In other words, the job is, I want to gain understanding. In other words, we hear somebody talk about some sexual term or something new, fad, new whatever, and we want to go look and see what it is. So sometimes curiosity is, although that for an adult, that's less frequent than for a kid. Peer pressure is to fit in. So again, this is more common with kids, but it does happen to adults too. It depends where you work. So for example, where I work in a Christian organization that's about sexual integrity, obviously I'm not going to feel like I fit in if I go look at porn. However, a lot of people who work in certain kinds of careers, especially very hands-on careers, there's a culture today more so than ever. People are talking about pornography and the latest thing they just saw all the time. Right. And as an adult, you can feel like I don't quite fit in here. And there can even be teasing and joking and that kind of stuff because you don't look at porn and that kind of thing. So I think this is going to be limited to not all people, but there is a little bit of that. And of course, a person with maybe shaky self-esteem, that would affect them more, as I wanted to see something to at least know how to talk about some joke, that they're talking about. The other way is excitement or to feel good. We forget sometimes that if early on when we look at pornography, we get an enormous dopamine hit. Mm-hmm. In fact, for a kid, the first few times they look at pornography, they may get a feeling that's more powerful and more exciting than they've ever had in their entire life. They didn't even know you could feel like this, right? Because of the chemicals that get dumped in your brain. And so sometimes we're going back because I want to get that excitement again. In other words, I'm just bored or whatever, and that'll feel exciting. Of course, as we know, that wears off, and something that would have made you feel really excited and got that huge dopamine hit years ago would do nothing for you now, and you have to see more and more and more. But that getting that hit that I'm bored, I need to be excited. That can be a reason.
Okay, let me stop you there for a second. I just want to go back and just do a quick review. Curiosity, peer pressure, excitement,
and to feel good. Yeah, excitement.
Okay, let me ask you this, because I had another word that came up and I wondered, where does it fit? Where does novelty fit in? Because certainly with internet porn, novelty is a big part of the search.
Right. And so that would also be in with the excitement. I'd lump that in there with that.
Could it be it could be curiosity as well, could it not?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm trying.
The fourth one is the one that we talk about the most in recovery, and that is to find comfort.
Okay.
Medicate emotional needs. So usually in adolescence, if we've been exposed to a lot of porn, we don't realize that we're learning. When I have a feeling that I don't know what to do with, mom and dad got in a fight, my friends make fun of me at school, whatever, I go to pornography and it makes me feel better for a minute. Not a little bit better, it makes me feel a lot better.
Right.
And what that does is the chemical dopamine, one of its purposes is to focus us on sex. And so it pushes any other thought, including any other feeling, off to the side. And so I want to be clear that it works very fast and works very powerful. So if I'm having a really hard feeling, the fastest and the most powerful way to deal with it other than shooting up heroin or something,
Mhm.
would be to look at porn. And so it does work. We hire it because it works.
Right.
Of course, as soon as we stop looking at it, it all comes back and we feel even worse. But and so this is the number one thing that is most recovery things focus on, is this helping us deal with emotions, getting more aware of our feelings and knowing what to do with our feelings, so we don't have to use porn. We have new ways to take care of that job. The other one is one we don't talk about as much with adults, and that is to feel freedom. So if we live a life, like if I have a life that I get up in the morning, I go to work, maybe I have to do some stuff for the family. I go to work, I have a long hours, I come home, I have responsibilities at home I have to do, and I go to bed, and there's no variation. That needing for freedom, that needing to feel like I'm just, porn is an escape. It's a way into to feel a sense of freedom. And so that is the job we hire. This one, defined validation, this one is not everyone. This is not something that applies to everyone. It does apply to me though. So,
okay.
And that is that and again, this usually starts in adolescence, is that maybe we don't feel good enough. Like as a man, I don't feel like I quite fit in, or if it was a woman, as a woman, I don't feel like I'm as good as the other guys, whatever. The reality is everybody feels that way at some point in time. But if you don't have any other way to deal with that feeling, to figure out how to feel validated, porn can be an artificial way to do that. A person's taking off their clothes in front of you. They don't really know you're watching, but it feels like they're inviting you to watch. It feels like I'm being validated by this person. The sexual stuff they're doing feels very validating. The fact that someone would do that for me, of course, it's not being done for me, but it can, in an artificial way, feel that way. And finally, the last one is to make sense of early sexual experiences or sexual abuse. So, both sexual abuse, but also if a child is like with other peers their own age, and it's not abuse, but they're experimenting sexually.
Sure.
Kids aren't really processed their brains aren't really set up to process that kind of information. And then they think, is this normal what I did, whatever? And so they'll start looking for, the way you can tell this is what a person's doing is this the porn that they're looking at resembles the kind of thing that happened back then. And maybe adults instead of kids, but you're looking at something that's like whatever act you did or whatever thing. And so you're trying to go back, and your brain is stuck in a cycle of trying to make sense of that, to feel normal, that kind of thing. So those are the 7 reasons jobs that we hire pornography to do. And it works very fast. It works in a very powerful way. It doesn't last very long. But when we have that desperation that, like, I need this job to be done for me. I need to fit in. I need to find excitement. I need to feel freedom. I really need to feel validated. Something happens that makes me really need to feel some kind of validation. The comfort one is an interesting thing. Reading some research, they're doing a lot of research. People are doing a lot of research on Google data. Because you can take surveys and see how many people have done this and how many people, but people lie on surveys, especially about sex.
Yeah.
But people can't lie on the internet. And so they just look at people's search history. And so here's an interesting bit of search history. You watch any Super Bowl and you search the 2 cities that are against each other here in America, the Super Bowl, right? The football teams.
Yep.
The city that wins, searches for porn drop significantly. The city that loses,
oh my goodness,
for porn skyrocket. And so you can see right there, I feel bad. My team lost. I need to feel better. I hire porn to do it. So you can see some interesting things like that.
Well, now I've got a good recovery reason for my Cowboys to win this year, because otherwise I'm going to need all of my guys here. It's interesting. You're talking just a couple different ideas that validation, they talked about it in high school, this idea of liquid courage, where you drink because it builds up your courage if you want to ask a girl out, or you're at a dance, or you're, and it's almost like validation. Porn is almost like a form of not liquid validation, but virtual validation, or some of those things. And of course, that's not even getting into the individual chats and individual connections with people. It's not that would be even more of a mainline drug, right? You talk almost about shooting up with something that's almost like a mainline drug. That's where I think maybe the gravitational pull in porn is to try to tap into that even more with people. Would you see that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. I think so. To me, the big, what excites me about this research is it gives us a tool to use. When we find ourselves going back to porn again, we can say, what is it I'm trying to get it to do for me? Instead, because most of my work has been about the emotion stuff, finding comfort, but finding comfort probably is a very high percentage of the reasons that we go back to porn, right?
Right.
But it's not the only reason,
Right.
because sometimes I've worked with guys in a support group setting or something like that, and they just can't think of anything bad that had happened. Like, does that make sense? And so it's like, and I remember I figure, well, I always just thought, well, maybe there must be something bad that happened they can't remember. Well, maybe not. I mean, maybe it's an abuse that happened a long time ago and something happened that reminded them of that and it came back. Or maybe their life is just a drudgery, that they don't have any sense of freedom. There's nothing wrong. They can't say, so it just gives you more tools to look at. We also have to remember that there's no shame in having needs. These 7 things are real needs.
Sure.
The abuse one is we need to make sense to process our wounds. We need to be validated. We need freedom. We need comfort. We need to fit in. We need excitement. We need to gain understanding. These are not wants, they're actual real needs. So the only way we're going to recover is to find better ways. The problem is the better ways always take longer to do.
Right. Well, I did a series on different stages of life, and the one about freedom, it really reminded me of, getting agency in our lives. I'm thinking, sometimes in your 30s, you think about somebody in that age, they've got young children that are, they go to work 40, 50 hours a week. They come home, there's young children involved. Their wives got a long to-do list for them. They have to, there's so many to-dos, and they fall into bed at night and they get up the next day and they do it all over again. And there's just, there's no excitement. There's nothing that makes them feel alive. There's nothing that makes them feel, in those areas. Right. There's no escape. It's just each day. And so porn gives them that area. So you're right. That's not deep rooted pain in somebody's childhood. That's just them looking for somewhere where they, they're driving the hot car with the hot girl and, and 24 again kind of thing. Right.
And it's, if we don't address that need for some sense of freedom somewhere,
right,
we're not going to see recovery.
Right.
And even if you forced yourself not to look at porn somehow, you would still just be engaged in fantasy and masturbation all the time.
Sure. Let me go back here to the very last one, because I just want to touch on this one for a sec. Sexual experiences, abuse. Some of the people I work with, it's like they're trying to recreate maybe their first sexual experience again. Those were often good, but you're saying that can actually be, if that had negative implications of a sexual experience, you could actually want to revisit an abusive situation. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, talk to me a little bit more about that, because most of us would say that's pretty counterintuitive.
Well, sexual abuse is part of my story. So I was sexually abused from the age of 5 to 14. So I know that story. Okay. Here's the problem with sexual abuse is many times, not necessarily all the time, even if there's parts of it that are traumatic, there's parts of it that feel good. Okay. And so you don't know what to do with that. So you go look at porn to watch somebody else doing what you did, to try, you don't even understand what you're doing, but you're trying to make sense of, why did I like that? Does that make sense? Okay. So it doesn't have to be a negative thing. I'm not an expert in abuse and that kind of thing, so I don't know all the stuff. But even if it was, I've heard people. I remember talking to a woman who was date raped in college, and she had been exposed to porn in 5th grade and kind of looked at it for a while and stopped. But after her date rape in college, she went back and started using porn again to try to make sense of what happened to her. And it wasn't a positive, it wasn't necessarily a positive experience. So sure. It's just, sex hits us different. If someone punched you in the gut, it'd be easier at some point in time to work through that and become friends. If someone raped you, you don't, it's still just an assault, but it's
Right.
not the same. And so you don't get over that in the same way, even though from an intellectual point of view, it's just a physical assault is all it is.
Yeah, this is really good. I know by my bent, I'm a pretty pragmatic guy, and I love working with guys and tools, and so it's really nice for me to stop in this podcast and say, you know what, let's dive a little deeper here in terms of some of the understanding. Let's do a bit of a deep dive into some of these reasons. That's really helpful. And as we talk and process about this, I know that you have a friend, and I'm trying to get him on my podcast, so I'll have to get you to leverage him. His name is Eddie Caparucci,
Mhm.
and he wrote this amazing book called Going Deeper. And as you're talking, I'm thinking back to some of the 7 types of children. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to do with all of these pathways, but it certainly does with the comfort
Mhm.
one.
Yeah,
And it,
he's got 9 children.
yeah,
And so, yeah, absolutely. So, like if I can think of one, the bored child.
yeah,
One of them is the bored child. Well, the finding freedom and the needing excitement would fit really well with that. You see what I'm
absolutely.
saying? Then he also has the sexually abused child, which obviously that the last number 7 here fits with.
Yeah. I'm looking here. I pulled the list up before we came on. The unnoticed child, the unaffirmed
Mhm.
child. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that really has to do with that validation
Yes.
component
Yes.
you're talking about. Right. And
Right.
so, interesting, the emotionally voided child. This is where, if I understand this, this is where you didn't have, or the need for control child. This is the
Hmm.
child that didn't have freedom,
Hmm.
right? Didn't have any
Right.
agency. And so now is like, he might wants to be married, might want kids, but now all of a sudden he just finds that he just feels trapped, or he just
Right.
feels bounded in, and is looking to break out, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So have you found, how have you found that material kind of informs some of your working with guys? Do you find that you're able to draw linkages back to some of these things with guys?
Well, until you've mentioned it, I've never compared these 7 reasons with Eddie's 9 children before. It's really good. They do. There is links there, but once I've read Eddie's book, I use his approach very heavily influences how I work with kids, because it just kind of helps. The idea of an inner child is not new. He didn't come up with the
Oh,
idea.
absolutely. Yeah.
He just categorized different types, and that made it help. By the way, he's coming out with a new book that's like a part 2 of like healing the inner child. So
Okay.
you're looking for that. It's not. I mean, it's not even to the publisher yet. So,
Okay.
but it's the draft is done. Yeah, it really has helped me now. But just so you know, I'm not a coach. I'm not a counselor. I'm not anything. I don't work. I occasionally I lead a support group in my area here in the outside the Portland area. That's part of another organization. I'm just a volunteer. That's not part of my job.
Yeah.
I consult with parents about some different kinds of things than this necessarily, although sometimes these 7 reasons fit into that. But in my training of people, and when I just maybe know somebody personally that just kind of as a friend, we're talking about some, as if I heavily draw off of Eddie's stuff.
Yeah. Hey, I've got no problem without the letters after your name. I have a commerce degree. Okay. So I don't even have a psychology degree. So, but here's the interesting thing. When you have somebody with a real story, and it can connect in a helpful way with other guys in their stories. There was an old book called Connection. I think Larry Crabb that actually talked about that. Actually is how most people are actually changed, is by connecting their story with somebody else's. So, I have no difficulty with how important that is in people's journeys. So, John, this has been super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to mention really quick, you
Yeah.
mentioned Eddie. I just thought of this, the finding freedom thing. One of the solutions he has is that he wants people to find a hobby. And so it's like, you need something to get that freedom, also excitement and validation, those types he doesn't specifically spell that out, but that's where that is. Like, you've got to have something that's your own to do. And so I know that when he has clients, he makes them get a hobby if they don't have one already.
Well, and if you don't deal with self-care, I just met with a fellow I was coaching yesterday, and he was like, he could tell that I was, he's a busy guy, successful guy, business wise. And it was like, so we're going to get together. And I said, dude, we're going to hammer you on self-care, because I got another guy that's just moving into retirement. And same thing, it's been so focused around work. And it's like, dude, we've got to find some other things. Because if your only version of play is porn, you're in big trouble. Because for me, porn equaled play for me.
Right.
But I've had to learn and discover. It's why my wife made me build a woodworking shop out back, that goes with that. So John, just tell a little bit more how people can connect with you and what Be Broken's doing, just in terms of.
So our website's bebroken.com, BEBROKEN.com. We help men, women, and families move from sexual brokenness to wholeness in Christ, and train others to do the same. So we have Dan Wobshaw is the director for men's stuff and Gateway to Freedom. We have a 3-day intensive for men in a few different states that people can go to. And that's kind of like if you're starting off or have gotten stuck, it's a place to go. A small group of guys with therapists there and a leader, someone like myself, and we go through a whole weekend. Gigi Hopkins is the wives care person. And so she does personal consulting and also groups, online groups like this, for wives who've been betrayed by their husbands to work through some of their stuff. She's amazing. And then we have all kinds of stuff for parents going on all through the year. We have online courses on purelifeacademy.org. So yeah, we have a lot of stuff. We also on the side train therapists and stuff too, but that's a different subject. So
there we go. John, thank you for coming on the show. It's been great.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.